Hello everybody, welcome back. Good to see you. My name is Noah. I am a concept artist, 2D animator, VFX artist, storyboard artist, comic book artist. And this is the Big Bad Anime Channel. We are so pleased to have you here today. And as always, I am joined by my sidekick, my partner in crime, the one and only Apocalypse Meow. Say what's up, Meow. Okay, I get it. Not in the mood to chat. Or at least I'm glad to have you here. Either way, even if you're in a bad mood. We got a great video for you. Today we are going to be going over 8 different ways to light the anime face, or lighting for anime faces. And the setup is, I have a layer of flat colors, and then I've moved those, copied and pasted directly on top of itself another layer of those flat colors, which I make darker and change the hue slightly, and that's my shadow layer. Then on top of that we have copy and paste those flats again. Now we make them brighter in the hue and saturation, and that becomes our highlight layer. Now I make a mask on each one of those layers except for our original flats. So the shadow layer gets a mask, highlight layer gets a mask, and that mask is turned to all black, so it's all turned off. Now we can start to paint in the areas where you have either shadows or highlights. With our character up here in the top left hand corner, the lighting is coming from behind her. So the majority of the shadows are going to fall in the front of the face, which is what we see. So it was easier for me to actually go with a completely showing mask, so it would be all white. And then I can paint in the places where the light actually hits and removes the shadow. It's a lot easier to just take out those little pieces because the majority of her face and what we can see is going to be in shadow than it is to go the other way around. And when it comes to the highlights, I can paint those in with white right on the mask, and it shines through. Now once we have all the areas that we like, the planes of light to fall upon and the shadows to fall upon, I do a gradient in reverse of the direction. So with the shadows, I do a gradient that's actually coming with white from the direction of the light and drag it all the way down to the bottom of the image. That kind of removes some of the, it creates a gradient in that mask that makes the light a little more subtle in the way it falls and a little bit more naturalistic. And then when it comes to the highlights, I do the opposite. So I would come from the bottom with white in a gradient tool and drag it up towards the light source. And this creates, same thing, it just in reverse, and it makes the light fall a little more gradually, and it looks a little more naturalistic. Now on the bottom here, we are actually moving on to the light kind of behind her head, but it's a little higher up in the sky. So if you can imagine, the sun at about midday, late afternoonish, it creates this ridge light effect where we're actually getting the planes of the shirt and the back of the head and just kind of the outer edge of what we can see of her face and shoulders is having the light fall upon it. We're still in the shadow layer here. I actually went and got my nice feather brush with that kind of diffused edge on it, and I'm actually painting back some of the mask a little bit. So we got our solid shapes of light, in quotations. And now I'm going along that edge of the solid shape and just kind of feathering it just slightly, painting it back a little bit so it just has a little bit less of a hard edge and it looks a little bit more like life. I think this is a kind of quick solution way of just infusing a little bit more realism into some of the ways that we light faces of just characters in general. And a lot of these are different ways to create kind of a dramatic effect with only lighting. Like, you're not seeing what she's looking at. You're not seeing what's going on. But just from the angle that you have the light coming in and crossing the face, you can create a lot of different kinds of emotional effects. And it reads differently. You'll see how each one of these has a totally different read, even though she's the exact same drawing. But the lighting creates a whole different kind of emotional effect. And knowing where the planes of the face are and how the light falls across them is a big part of understanding lighting and dramatic lighting for the face in particular. And the first step in my process is getting these hard shapes of either light or shadow painted in the mask at 100% opacity. Now, once we have them painted in, we can always reduce the layer's opacity to like a 66%, a 75%, something like that, to allow some of the underneath layer to kind of come through. You'll notice here I switched to a sepia tone, or a golden kind of tone here. And I found that painting with the colors, this is just a gradient mask that I used to create this kind of sepia tone effect. I found that I was getting lost in the process, lost in the sauce a little bit with the colors. And when you break it down to either a monotone like this with sepia, or even just a black and white, well, I would say first off, do it in a way that is non-destructive. So you can always go back to your color when you need to. Just put it on a layer that's in front of all your other layers, and it'll affect everything below it, like a gradient map. If you need to know, the gradient maps are actually the bottom of the layer menu. There's a button down there that'll open up your gradient map menu, and you can go in there and play around. And I found that working within this monotone helps me see the light and the shadow a little bit better. Now, when I remove it, all the color information is still there. You haven't lost anything. But when you're working within these kind of studies or even just a piece, it might be really helpful to kind of have a layer in front of everything that allows you to see it in these monotone or black and white, to see pure tonality, which is different than the hue, which means color, essentially. You can see we're actually painting out the shadow layer here to create light. Once I've created the mask as 100% shadow, anything I paint out of that mask makes it look like lighting, even though it's just the absence of darkness. And then once we get into our highlight layer, we can start to paint in some of those little shine areas on the face, places that always kind of reflect light a little bit more than others. The T-zone, I guess it's called, or the tip of the nose, little parts on the cheek, lips, all have different ways that they reflect light. It sounds weird. It depends on how sweaty the skin is. It depends on how, the kind of oiliness that the person has of their skin. But generally speaking, there's a way that light bounces off the face. And we can replicate that with shadow and highlight on different layers. And if you feel you need to go deeper than that, you can always create another shadow layer that's a little bit darker and kind of recreate that process with the masks and paint in even less. For this third example, the light is kind of coming from a downward angle up to her face, but it's also coming from kind of the right side as well. So it's not a completely like campfire ghost story shot. But there is, if you have light coming from a downward angle up towards the face, it always creates an uncanny, a little bit of a spooky feel, or like it's an unnatural lighting situation. Because we're so used to seeing light come from top down. Anytime we see a kind of a ground-based light, it looks uncanny, it looks supernatural, it looks scary. That's why it's used for so many like horror, ghost stories, all those kind of genres. And you can see this in this fourth example even more so, because the light is directly coming up from the bottom to her face. And especially when you match that with big eyes, when the eyes kind of get bigger than usual, like excitement or surprise. And then with the pupils down closer to the bottom of the eyes, looking downwards, that can create a real like surprise, scary horror dynamic. So you marry those three things together, you're going to get somebody who looks like they're scared out of their mind. Now we repeat the process that we've been doing. When the light's coming from the bottom like this, I feel like I can use a little heavier hand with the lighting than I could when I was lighting it from behind, because you're going to have more areas of the face that are going to be affected by the light. This is something I think it's really important to have at least a basic understanding of, just how the direction of the light and the intensity of the light from hitting the face from different angles can really create a whole different feel from the same batch of line art and flat colors. So think a lot about where, there's kind of the standard places to put shadow and light, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking to kind of punch up the drama or punch up the emotional content in a scene, there are a lot of different ways to do that, and especially with light. One of the genres of film that was really big on this is kind of an old one, but if you want to do a little research, old noir films, detective noir, was really big on using lighting to create dramatic effect. And I think a lot of that had to do with they didn't have a lot of special effects or big budgets in that day, so they had to do a lot with a little. And when you're just starting out as an artist, you're in the similar position. You got to do a lot with very little. And one way to do that, to sell an idea, is with kind of bringing that drama or that just whatever the emotion is to that forefront. So, and knowing, okay, so in this fifth example, we've got the light kind of coming from a more naturalistic direction, kind of upwards angle down towards the face. And you'll see that hits a little differently than the one down here, the fourth example, where the light is coming from the bottom. And each one of these things sells a different idea. So in this example, once we have these shapes, we've got all my shapes of shadow here, I can feather back along each of the edge of that shape with my nice diffused edge feather brush and make it look a little more real, make it look a little bit more like life. So here's my challenge to you. Next time that you draw a character, whatever character, whatever the next sketch or drawing that you have, that you're working on, when you get the line art and the flat colors are done, you're set aside, you're good, you've saved it, go find some lighting reference on a real person, an actual photo, with some interesting lighting that you like. It doesn't have to be the same pose or look anything like your character. And take that lighting reference and apply it to your line art, to your drawing. That's what I'm doing here. Is I'm taking directional light reference, photo, and applying it to a drawing that I had and trying to make those two things meld and gel. And it's a really interesting challenge. It brings out all kinds of stuff in the character that I didn't notice was there when it was just flat colors and line art. And that's really what I believe adding that extra dimension of like painting light in is for, is to sell an idea that you're trying to get across, whatever that may be. And each one of these directions of light and the way they hit the face comes with a different effect, a different emotional impact, a different idea that it looks like they're selling. And that has power, and knowing how to use that and wield that in your toolbox is going to be a huge benefit moving forward. And I believe using lighting reference that isn't in the same, doesn't look like your line art, but it is lighting that you like, is a really significant challenge that any artist who wants to improve their ability to paint light on a character should really take and have some fun with. I think a lot of times when it comes to studies, anatomy studies, lighting studies, fabric studies, any of these things for artists, they can kind of feel like a chore or something, an obligation, something you have to do. But I would challenge you to take the opposite approach and really look at this as a time to have fun Maybe these other things that you have to do are the obligation. And this is the chance that you get to have fun and try a bunch of different things and swing for the fences and see what's possible and see what maybe you still got to work on, places that you want to grow. So take study time actually as fun time. You could just swap in those two words. And so for these lighting studies, I think it's really good to try things and go to places that you don't necessarily normally go and see how far you can push that line. And when you've stepped across the line, you'll know, because it stops working. It stops looking like it should. And then you can always come back and step back to the right side of the line again. Study time is your time. Study time is free time. Study time is fun time. And I did have a really fun time working on these lighting studies today with you. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or something I didn't really cover all the way that you want to know more about, just drop it in the comments and I will get to it directly. This is your time, y'all. It's really something. Your artistic and creative time, I feel, is a real moment that you can take for yourself and build something for yourself, whether that be your own intellectual properties, your own original characters, or just, a chance to kind of cut loose and not feel so obligated to do anything one particular way. Creativity is supposed to break through boundaries, and it's supposed to kind of develop new ways to do things. If you're a creative problem solver, well, you think outside the box. And this is the right place for you, because that's all we do here at the Big Bad Anime Channel, is thinking outside of the box and being creative. There's really no other way to be, in my opinion. It's a wonderful day, you guys. Beautiful outside, sun is shining. What better day than today than to start getting creative? We are the Big Bad Anime Channel. I am Noah. This is my little sidekick, the cat, the myth, the legend, Apocalypse Meow, and it has been our pleasure, our honor to be here today. We got a lot more in store, good stuff coming up. I'm gonna be doing some more in my GTA art style series. I'll be traveling to do some more art on the road in a foreign country next month. There's a lot of really cool stuff coming down the line, so make sure to stay tuned and subscribe and comment if you got some questions, like all that good stuff. It does a lot of good for the channel. We really appreciate it here. So, all right, you guys, take care.